Clara Mitchell had managed to stay on scene for 3 years. She was the quiet woman who laid out breakfast at 600, lunch at 1200, and dinner at 1800 for the Navy SEALs stationed at Forward Operating Base Falcon. Wearing her hair at, she kept her gaze low and rarely said more than a polite, "What can I get you?" to the operators passing through her line. When enemy fighters broke through the base perimeter and zip-tied her SEAL brothers, Clara didn't panic like the rest of the kitchen staff. Instead, she slipped off her apron, reached beneath the industrial freezer, and drew a weapon that made the closest attacker freeze in shock. In that moment, it became clear the mess hulk was far more than she seemed. Forward Operating Base Falcon stood like a block of concrete carved into the harsh Afghan desert, its walls rising as a monument to America's long presence in a land scarred by endless war. 300 personnel were stationed there, but the heart of the base was SEAL Team 712 of the nation's finest warriors, men who vanished into the night on missions never meant to appear in official records. At 29, Clara Mitchell had worked in the mess hall for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Once known as Staff Sergeant Clara Mitchell of the 75th Ranger Regiment, she had been one of the Army's most promising airborne infantry soldiers. She graduated Ranger School at the top of her class, qualified as an expert marksman with 7 different weapons, and earned assignments to some of the toughest special operations missions the Army could offer. Her shift from elite operator to kitchen duty wasn't immediate. It began on her final mission as a Ranger, an operation in Syria, where she was ordered to eliminate a high-value target who turned out to be far younger than she had ever expected. Far too young, that mission, though successful, left a scar medals and commendations could never heal. Despite promotions waiting for her, Clara requested reassignment away from combat, citing personal reasons her superiors accepted without demanding details. Those who had given everything to their country had earned the right to step back when it became too heavy to carry on. She was placed in food service at FB Falcon, where her logistical skills still mattered, but no one asked her to decide who lived or died. For 3 years, the setup worked flawlessly. Clara found peace in preparing meals instead of pulling triggers. She felt a quiet pride watching SEAL Teams 7 head out well-fed and ready, knowing she supported their missions without being part of the violence itself. It was simple work, necessary work, and it allowed her to finally rest without the nightmares that had followed her during her combat tours. SEAL Team 7 accepted her presence with the same easy indifference seasoned warriors gave to support staff. They valued good meals and dependable service, but they never pried into her past. To them, Clara was Mom, the cook who kept them fueled and who always had coffee waiting when they returned from the field. Their leader was Commander Daniel Foster, a veteran of 15 years in naval special warfare, respected for his sharp tactical mind and the calm steadiness that made men follow him without hesitation. At 38, Commander Daniel Foster knew enough to realize that not everyone working in support roles had chosen to be there, and he was wise enough not to pry into things people didn't want to share. His second in command was Chief Petty Officer Luis Ortega, a weapons expert who could make any firearm perform with deadly precision. Ortega had noticed details about Clara that others overlooked. The way she moved around the kitchen as if it were a battlefield. How her eyes constantly scanned for danger even while serving meals. How she kept her back against walls and always knew every available exit. Still, Ortega was smart enough to recognize another soldier who had deliberately stepped away from combat, and he honored that choice in silence. The rest of the unit included demolition specialists, communications experts, medics, and close-quarters fighters. All of them were seasoned professionals, hardened by multiple deployments, and they understood that everyone at FB Falcon had a purpose, whether it was openly acknowledged or quietly personal. What none of them realized was that Clara's daily schedule involved far more than cooking. Every morning at 04:30, before the rest of the base stirred, she conducted her own quiet inspection of the messel's defenses. She memorized every doorway, every choke point, and every tool or piece of equipment that could double as a weapon if needed. Beneath the industrial freezer, wrapped in waterproof plastic and hidden behind cleaning supplies only she touched, Leia's stash of weapons and gear she had gathered over 3 patient years. To her, this wasn't paranoia, it was preparedness. Clara had learned during her time in combat that danger arrived without warning, and survival often depended on anticipating what others never considered. She had hoped she would never be forced to rely on that cash. But she knew hope alone wasn't a strategy that kept people breathing when chaos struck. On the morning of October 15th, chaos arrived. Clara was in the middle of cooking breakfast when the first explosion rattled the outer walls of FB Falcon. The initial blast was distant enough for most personnel to shrug it off as routine ordnance disposal or a training exercise, but Clara's combat-trained instincts told her otherwise. She recognized the thump of incoming rocket-propelled grenades immediately, and her tactical mind began mapping angles of attack and response times before the second strike confirmed her suspicion. 30 seconds later, the base alarm screamed to life, their shrill tones signaling enemy contact and ordering everyone to defensive positions. Through the missile windows, Clara saw soldiers sprinting toward fortified stations while officers barked commands and organized countermeasures. Yet something about the pattern was off. Explosions erupted from several directions at once, pointing to a coordinated assault by attackers who knew the base's layout intimately. More disturbing was that the blasts weren't random. They were striking specific targets with deliberate intent. This wasn't the work of opportunistic fighters. It was the mark of a disciplined military operation. Clara kept working at the stove, outwardly calm, while her sharp ears followed the radio chatter of the security teams and her eyes tracked the unfolding battle through the glass. Her combat years had taught her that panic killed faster than bullets, and routine could anchor morale when everything else was collapsing. Inside, though, her brain was racing, analyzing threats and preparing for contingencies the standard defense plans likely hadn't accounted for. The third wave of explosions struck closer, more precise, hammering the base's communications hub and power grid. From the kitchen window, Clara watched as the attackers methodically severed FB Falcon's ability to call for help or coordinate with higher command. Whoever led the assault knew precisely how to cut the base off from outside help. That was when Clara saw the infiltrators. Through the haze of smoke and the chaos of explosions, figures in dark tactical gear slipped through sections of the perimeter that should have been untouchable. They moved with discipline, taking cover properly and advancing with techniques that spoke of years of training and real combat experience. These weren't ragtag insurgents or chance fighters. This was a team of professional soldiers executing a mission with careful planning. Clara counted at least 20 in the first wave, all carrying advanced weapons and outfitted with gear that pointed to heavy funding and organized support. Their advance wasn't random. They were headed towards specific targets, the command post, the communications hub, and as Clara's stomach dropped, the SEAL Team 7 barracks. From her vantage point in the kitchen, she watched in rising dread as the attackers boxed in the very building where her men were resting. SEAL Team 7 was caught off guard during what should have been routine downtime. Panned in and outnumbered, they were the most dangerous warriors on the base. But even they were cornered 4-1 with no ground advantage. The firefight for the barracks lasted exactly 7 minutes. Clara marked the time by the clock on the kitchen wall, watching America's finest make their stand against impossible odds. The SEALs fought with the precision and teamwork that had made them legends, but the enemy had studied this battle in advance and brought superior numbers and positioning. One by one, she saw her men fall not killed but subdued. Non-lethal rounds and darts told her the attackers weren't after blood, they wanted prisoners. Commander Daniel Foster was the first taken down, hit by what looked like a tranquilizer dart as he tried to direct his team's defense. Chief Ortega held out half a minute longer, dropping 2 assailants before being swarmed and restrained. In under 10 minutes, the entire team was captured, bound, and prepared for transport. Through the mess hall window, Clara's eyes followed as the men she had fed for 3 years were dragged limp toward vehicles that seemed to appear from nowhere. This was no raid. It was a calculated kidnapping carried out with precision against America's most feared special operators. Meanwhile, the base's regular defenders were still locked in their own desperate fight. The attack had been orchestrated to flood defensive lines, leaving the real goal, the seizure of SEAL Team 7, to unfold without interference. By the time security forces grasped what had happened, the team was already being loaded into transport vehicles, vanishing into the Afghan wilderness. Clara remained frozen in the kitchen, watching the taillights fade, something deep inside her snapping awake. For 3 years, she had been Staff Sergeant Clara Mitchell, retired from combat, a woman who had chosen the peace of service over the brutality of war. But seeing her team hauled away by enemy hands reignited a part of her soul that kitchen duty had kept buried. With deliberate calm, she stripped off her apron and hairnet, every movement carrying lethal intent. Her hands found the waterproof case beneath the freezer, the one she had promised herself she would never open. The weight of the combat knife was instantly familiar, as was the feel of the compact pistol and the tools meant for stalking and striking targets behind enemy lines. For the first time in 3 years, Staff Sergeant Clara Mitchell was back on the hunt. The shift happened instantly and completely. The woman who stepped out of the mess hall was no longer the cook everyone thought she was. Her posture was sharper, her steps fluid, and her eyes carried the cold intensity of someone who had crossed from caretaker to predator. Her first task was to gather intelligence. The attackers had been far too informed about FB Falcon's defenses and routines for this to have been chance. Someone on the inside had handed over sensitive details, and Clara knew she had to uncover the breach before she could rescue her team. Clara pushed through the smoke and confusion toward the communication center, moving with the same sharp awareness that had carried her through multiple combat tours. The facility was damaged but still functional, and she quickly tapped into emergency protocols that helped her piece the situation together. The attack had been timed with brutal precision to align with a scheduled shift change in the security rotation, leaving a 40-minute window when defenses were thin and coordination was weakest. The enemy had exploited that gap to breach the perimeter, disable key targets, and secure their prize. SEAL Team 7. Before the base could mount a proper response, more unsettling than the execution was the information that had made it possible. Whoever planned this had intimate knowledge of the base's layout, schedules, defensive procedures, and personnel details. That level of detail could only have come from an insider with clearance. Clara dove into the personnel database, cross-checking access logs against the timeline of the assault, and the results confirmed her worst fear. Someone inside FB Falcon had been feeding the enemy for at least half a year, laying the groundwork that allowed SEAL Team 7's capture. The traitor was Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Rohr, the executive officer tasked with overseeing security itself. His clearance covered every aspect of base operations. He knew SEAL Team 7's movements in detail, and his financial record showed deposits that matched each intelligence leak over the past year. But unmasking the betrayer didn't bring her people back. To do that, Clara had to track the vehicles that had carried them away and figure out where they were being held. Experience had taught her that professional kidnappers always worked from prepared strongholds, secure enough to contain prisoners of that caliber. Using the intelligence system still online, she began mapping known enemy safe houses and facilities within 50 kilometers of FB Falcon. Whoever had taken the SEALs would need a site remote enough to avoid detection, fortified enough to hold 12 elite Americans, and supplied well enough to withstand a rescue attempt. The options narrowed quickly. 3 locations fit the bill: an abandoned mining site in the mountains northwest of the base, a decommissioned Soviet military complex to the east, and a network of caves long used by militant groups. Clara weighed each carefully. The mining site was too exposed without solid defensive ground. The caves were too difficult to reach with vehicles and lacked the infrastructure to hold prisoners securely. That left the Soviet installation silent for 2 decades, but still standing with hardened buildings perfect for detention. Her next obstacle was personal. She had to decide whether to wait for an official rescue team or take matters into her own hands. By the book, she should have relayed intel upward and waited for a properly supported mission. But she knew that would take days to organize. Intelligence hinted SEAL Team 7 would be moved within 24 hours. The clock was already against her. The decision wasn't really a decision at all. Commander Foster, Chief Ortega, and the rest of the team had built their careers on pulling others out of hopeless situations. They deserved someone willing to take the same risks for them. Clara also knew she had advantages no outside unit could match. She understood those men personally, knew how they reacted under pressure, and could coordinate with them in ways strangers never could. Years spent serving their meals had given her a quiet map of their temperaments, strengths, and instincts. Knowledge she could turn into an edge. For 2 hours she prepared, gathering gear from her hidden cache and raiding supplies she could access without drawing suspicion. Every item was chosen for one purpose: a solo strike to bring her team home. Clara's gear was chosen with precision, tailored for a one-woman strike against a fortified compound. Lightweight weapons built for accuracy, only the essentials to stay mobile, and specialized breaching tools for breaking through defenses. The abandoned Soviet installation lay 30 kilometers east of FB Falcon, reachable only by winding mountain paths that offered concealment, but slowed her progress. Her plan was clear: scout the site during daylight, chart guard rotations and defensive positions, then strike before dawn when human vigilance would be at its lowest. The journey to the facility consumed 6 grueling hours as she crept through hostile terrain. Clara's combat training allowed her to slip undetected through ground that would have been impassable for civilians, though even her skills were tested by the demands of operating solo deep inside enemy territory. The installation itself was larger than intelligence had suggested, its buildings fortified and clearly active, signs of organized and ongoing use. She counted no fewer than 30 hostile personnel during her reconnaissance, all well-armed and disciplined, their movements betraying professional military backgrounds. Their security posture, however, was focused inward, aimed at keeping captives from escaping rather than preventing intruders from slipping in. That miscalculation gave Clara openings she could exploit. Patrols followed predictable patterns, and their communications had exploitable gaps an experienced infiltrator could slip through. Her surveillance confirmed what she feared. SEAL Team 7 was held in the central building, a reinforced structure once used for Soviet communications. Guard presence was heavy, but their routines repeated with enough regularity to create windows for an operator of her caliber. At exactly 0300, when fatigue dulled awareness and guard rotations were thinnest, Clara launched her assault. Every move was deliberate, professional, and silent. One by one, she incapacitated perimeter sentries, leaving them alive but unconscious. This was a rescue, not a vendetta. Penetrating the central building's defenses demanded her most refined skills. Electronic locks, motion detectors, and linked communication systems all had to be bypassed with precision. Each failure threatening to trigger alarms. Years of classified operations paid off as she dismantled the security net step by step, carving herself a path straight to her team. Inside, she found SEAL Team 7 gathered in a former communications hall. The men were awake, wrists bound behind them but otherwise unharmed. Commander Daniel Foster looked up, confusion flashing across his face before giving way to recognition and respect in the span of seconds. "Clara," he whispered, his voice laced with surprise and dawning comprehension. "Staff Sergeant Clara Mitchell, 75th Ranger Regiment," she answered calmly, already slicing through his restraints. "I am here to take you home." The escape tested every ounce of her training. Leading 12 recently freed SEALs across enemy territory without vehicles or air cover was a daunting task that challenged both her leadership and combat instincts. But SEAL Team 7 was forged from the same steel as she was. Once unbound, they adapted instantly, shifting from captives to predators. Clara's solo mission became a joint assault as 13 hardened warriors turned the tables on an enemy that had prepared to guard prisoners, not repel an all-out counterattack from America's deadliest operators. The fight for the Soviet compound raged for 45 minutes before ending in the total annihilation of the enemy force that had taken SEAL Team 7. Clara's reconnaissance and precision strike set the stage, but it was the combined might of 13 seasoned operators that turned what began as a rescue into a crushing defeat for their captors. As the team regrouped to head back to FB Falcon, Commander Daniel Foster walked over to her. In a low voice, he asked, "I need to know, who have I really had cooking my breakfast for the past 3 years?" Clara met his gaze with a calm steadiness, the look of someone who had reconciled both her past and her present. "Someone who wanted to serve food instead of fight," she said simply. "Someone who learned that sometimes you don't get to choose your role when your people need you." The debrief for SEAL Team 7 stretched 6 hours and produced reports that would remain classified but would shape doctrine in special operations for years. Clara's performance earned her immediate offers for reinstatement to active duty with promotions and coveted assignments waiting if she wanted them. She turned every offer down. "I'm not ready to be a full-time warrior again," she told Foster privately. "But I won't stand by pretending I'm just a cook if my people are in danger. There has to be a middle ground." The answer came from an unexpected place. Within the special operations community, new programs were being developed for personnel who could blend into civilian environments yet remain ready to act when crisis struck. Clara's rare blend of skills, her ability to disappear into support roles, and her proven willingness to fight when the moment demanded made her the perfect fit. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Clara Mitchell was quietly assigned to a classified initiative that placed former operators in support positions at bases worldwide. Her official title was Food Service Supervisor, but her true mission was providing security oversight and rapid crisis response for high V-value personnel. She still served breakfast at 600, lunch at 1200, and dinner at 1800, but now she did so with the full backing of commanders, who understood that sometimes the strongest guardians were the ones no one suspected. SEAL Team 7 returned to duty with renewed confidence, knowing their base was shielded by someone who had already proven she would walk through fire to bring them back alive. They still called her Mom, but the word now carried the respect reserved for a warrior who had earned her place through deeds, not titles. Clara found balance in her two identities. She was the cook who kept America's elite fueled for battle, and the protector who could shift from caregiver to fighter in an instant. Her new kitchen was larger than the one at FB Falcon, serving personnel from across multiple branches of special operations. Clara approached it with the same focus she once brought to combat, ensuring every meal was precise, every detail accounted for, and every soldier under her care ready for the missions ahead. Beneath the industrial freezer, wrapped in waterproof plastic and hidden behind supplies only she touched, lay another cache of weapons and gear she prayed never to use. But Clara knew hope wasn't a survival strategy. Experience had taught her that the difference between victory and defeat often came down to having the right person ready when the impossible turned real. Late at night, when the base was quiet and her kitchen finally still, Clara sometimes stood at the window, staring at the stars above whatever country she was serving that year. Clara reflected on the choices that had led her here, the balance she had finally struck between the warrior she once was and the guardian she had chosen to become. She was invisible again, but this time it was a different kind of invisibility. Instead of concealing her skills, she was quietly using them to shield others in ways no one around her would ever fully recognize. She stood as proof that the most effective warriors weren't always the ones carrying rifles on the front lines. Sometimes they were the ones behind a serving line, offering food and silent strength with unwavering dedication. The soldiers and sailors who passed her window for breakfast might never realize the cook dishing their eggs was also their most dependable protector. But Clara Mitchell knew, and that knowledge gave her a sense of purpose far greater than any medal or promotion could. She had found her place not as hunter or victim, not purely as warrior or civilian, but as something rarer, the guardian who protected guardians, the unseen strength that kept America's most visible heroes safe and ready for whatever fight lay ahead. And if the day came when her people faced danger again, when the impossible became necessary and the unthinkable became real, Clara would be ready. Not because she longed for combat, but because she had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love was the willingness to be dangerous for those you swore to protect. The kitchen would always wait for her return when the battle ended. Until then, she would be whatever her people needed her to be. Some of the most important battles are waged by names never recorded in history, their deeds sealed in reports that will never be read. Clara Mitchell was living proof that heroism doesn't always shout, that true strength doesn't always come with ribbons and rank, and that the most powerful protectors often look like anyone else. She was the cook who could become a weapon, the caregiver who could transform into a fighter, the unseen guardian standing watch over America's most celebrated warriors. In a world where threats could rise without warning and safety was never certain, that blend of quiet dedication and lethal skill was more valuable than any tool in the arsenal. Clara understood that some stories are best left untold, some skills left unspoken. Her greatest legacy wasn't in the classified missions or the firefights she had survived. It was in the quiet breakfasts where weary operators found a sliver of peace, in the hot meals waiting after brutal drills, in the steady presence that reminded warriors they were valued for more than just their combat prowess. The history books may never record her name, and her actions may remain hidden long after the victories they secured are forgotten. But Clara Mitchell stood as living proof that heroism often hides in silence.